Okay, so last week, Alex Salmond launched his, well, manifesto for an independent Scotland in the form of a 650-page white paper, which presumably everyone in Scotland is reading avidly now.
Of
Um,
course.
but a lot of the things that he was talking about were actually pretty conservative, considering what he could have done in the manifesto. For example, he's still planning on keeping the Queen. He's still planning on remaining in the sterling sort of zone, or creating a sterling zone, which is to
Hmm.
say that they'll keep the British pound. Um, and more than that, he outlined ideas about a more socialistic state, so more spending on childcare, the abolition of
He
the
wants to
bedroom.
have free childcare for every kid over one for like in the next like 3 or 4 years, isn't it?
Something like that, yeah. I mean, he,
Yeah.
he outlined a whole list of what would, I guess, would be called sort of socialistic kind of proposals,
Hmm.
and people at the end of the day were asking, how's he going to pay for all of this? And the only thing he seems to think will pay for it at the moment is Scottish oil. Um, but it wasn't an entirely convincing proposal, at least from my point of view. But what did you think of it, Jazza?
Well, at the end of the day, Jimmy, we are dirty Englishmen south of the border, and nobody will give a shit what we think about this anyway. But despite that, we still insist on making this video.
Yeah, we will do.
I think that. So for me, I would, if I were Scottish, I think that an independent Scotland would find a way to be to be a very high functioning independent country. So if I were Scottish, I probably would vote yes.
What
To
do you
be
mean by
completely
high?
honest.
What do you mean by high functioning, though?
To be able to, to be able to have low levels of poverty and to have a standard of living that is not, well, they're not going to become the Greece of Europe, I don't think. I think that Scotland would be able to survive on its own, despite the fact that there are a load of hypothetical figures going around that if North Sea oil doesn't get split off fairly, which
Mm.
actually, even as an Englishman, I think that if they do become independent, it should be split off fairly. They won't be able to spend a lot of the things that on a lot of the things that they want to spend on.
So you don't
But
expect that his a sort of program of welfare will be as extensive as he's said it will be? Is that what you're
no,
saying?
no, I don't believe
Okay.
so at all. And that declaration for childcare, I think, is going to be one of the first ones to go, to be
Mm.
completely honest. I'm surprised that you say that he wasn't very radical, because I think, despite the fact that he probably is a Republican at heart, and all of those kinds of things, I was surprised that that it was so radical to suggest that he wants to completely tie any kind of defence links with the UK by scrapping Trident. He would effectively scrap Trident on our behalf because everything is focused on the Clyde.
Well, he said that
Um,
there'd be a 4-year kind of turnover period, and I don't find it plausible that the Westminster government would just say, "Oh well, since they're scrapping it up there, we're just going to
yeah,
sink
but
sink Trident into the Irish Sea or
there's
something."
it's a lot of money to have to build those facilities somewhere else, and to be
I
completely
think
honest,
they'll
with the
just
level
do
of
it. I
public
think they'll just
spending
do
that
it.
was- Really? I don't know. I think that if Scotland refuses to continue looking after and building our nuclear submarines for us, I think that there would be a compelling argument south of the border for us to scrap it. Because it would just be an awful lot of investment. Granted, it's about a
Mm.
trillion pounds for just one of these things, isn't it? But I think that it would mean that we would end up having to say goodbye to it. But I was surprised that he took that hard a line on it. Um,
Well, if anything, I think he sort of softened his approach, because initially it seemed as though he was just going to instantly scrap it sort of the week after he just marched down and closed down the port,
yeah,
which obviously
seal off the
wasn't
borders,
realistic.
rebuild Hadrian's Wall.
Yeah, I mean, Hadrian's Wall is entirely in England, so maybe
Yeah.
not, but yeah. There's another wall they could rebuild, but no, I just don't see it happening.
See, the thing is also, the Scottish response to this 650-page Bible that they wrote, and I agree that it's incredibly comprehensive. I'm not an economist, so I can't say an awful lot about the financial plausibility of the kind of stuff that he's proposing. But the thing is, I think it was after that was released, there was a poll that said that only 27% of Scottish people would vote yes, which is actually a drop as to what it was before.
That is a drop, yeah.
So it doesn't look good. However, it does depend on who you're asking, obviously, because it's polling, and the only poll that's important is the election that actually happens and the referendum that actually happens. But there is still a significant possibility that if enough of the people who are undecided, enough of the swing voters, are convinced to vote yes, then there's still a very high chance that it could go through, and the United Kingdom could be decapitated.
But I mean, on the balance of probabilities, you'd have to say that it's not going to happen, wouldn't you? I mean, it's still possible, but it's always going to be possible up until the day before the election happens, more or less.
True.
Not election, referendum.
True. But I see, if Scotland became an independent country, I'd be like writing my application to change nationality like that, because it looks like the nation that they're going to be building looks like it's going to be quite nice to live in. Bugger London and the fact that I can't afford to buy anything, and the NHS being privatised, Royal Mail is now in private hands. I think I might move, go to Edinburgh.
I imagine there's a lot of people in Northern England who are actually thinking just that at the moment. I mean, the questions that he didn't answer included the main one would be the EU question.
They're buggered with that because of Spain and Catalonia.
Yeah, that does seem to be the case, and I think if they're going to have to leave the EU to become independent
and then reapply,
that kind of seems to be a huge reason, even if you're in favour of independence in general, not to vote to actually do that, really. And I imagine a lot of people who want to be independent are exactly the sort of people who want to remain in the EU. So it seems like an impossible decision, really.
It's ironic that we might be forcing Scotland to be kicked out of the EU, but then we have a huge number of English people who want to leave the EU, but we've stuck in it because well, nobody wants to answer that question, do they? But I find it really interesting that obviously Spanish politics is not obscure for us.
No.
But the fact that the chance that the right-wing Spanish government has such influence over Scotland's future, I think that's really, really interesting because of the Catalonian argument. But then it's really difficult to draw a parallel between the two because Scotland is getting a referendum. They get to choose. And the question now is which way they choose. The thing is, if you gave Catalonia a referendum, it would be independent within the week.
Yeah, they would leave, wouldn't they? So,
yeah, quite significantly. They'd win hands down.
I mean, a lot of the reason I think Cameron was willing to give a referendum, because in theory he could have put it off until at least the next Parliament before making a decision on it.
Yeah.
Is that I think the reason he gave
Isn't that just the way, kick the can down the road and give it to the next guy who's in charge?
He could have done that, but I think the reason he did it is because he was expecting them to vote to stay in. I think, probably. I mean, that's assuming he's a unionist.
I think we can assume that David Cameron
I don't know that you can, to be honest. But
really?
yeah, I mean,
where's your evidence?
Well, where's your evidence that he's a unionist? He's been pretty quiet on the whole thing.
The fact that he's a conservative?
That doesn't mean anything, he's not a real conservative.
Fair point. Hugger hoodie conservatism.
But yeah, I think the reason he called the referendum is because if they say no, which I think is probably what's going to happen, it will delay the question at least 10 years, so...
more than that. More than that. Like, think how long it's taken us to have a second EU referendum. Like, it's like 40 years?
That's true, but if you look at... The Scottish devolution happened in '98 after a referendum, and there was a previous referendum on pretty much the same thing. I think it was under the Callaghan government in '78. So, and I think the sort of desire for more devolutionary powers has only increased since then. So, I mean, if we had we're going to have a referendum next year, I could see there being another one in sort of 10, 15 years if it doesn't go the way Salmon wants it to go. But it really depends if the desire for independence increases in that time period, really.
Can we agree that whoever ends up losing. So if Scotland votes yes, David Cameron is going to have to step down.
Yeah.
If Scotland votes no, Salmond is going to step down.
Yeah, for sure. Like, there's just...
To be completely honest, I will miss Alex Salmond. I think that he is a ball of very... I think that he's a legitimate politician. He has the charisma of Boris Johnson without being a knob. And I don't know, I think that it would be a shame to lose him from the political debate that we have in this country, despite the fact that he's a bit Nigel Farage in that it's all one policy.
Issue, yeah.
Well, that's all we hear. That's all we hear south of the border, anyway. I'm sure in Scotland that he speaks about other stuff.
I don't know. I find like people who hammer on like the Farage thing, who hammer on about Europe, or in Salmond's case, Scotland. I feel that some of the times you think, well, you obviously have other political desires, and shouldn't they be more important? Well, shouldn't they be more important to him than the relatively totemic question of Scottish? It's not really Scottish independence, because they're going to be, you know, either part of the EU or part of Britain. Really, those are their choices. It's not a big. It's not a big enough. Well, it's not a big enough or a big enough or strong enough country really to stand purely on its own. That's the reality of being a little country.
See, I don't buy that argument. I think that no matter how big or small a country, I think that Scotland, it's a developed nation. It has developed infrastructure, and it's not like it's going to all of a sudden become a third world country.
That's not what I'm saying. But when people talk about Britain leaving the EU, they always say, well, wouldn't Britain be really weakened, and it would just be putting itself in thrall to all these forces, these economic forces, and would have no control over them. Exactly the same argument applies to Scotland, even more so, because Scotland would be a smaller country.
That's a fair point. So if you were Scottish,
yeah,
if you can put yourself in those shoes, because it was only 4 generations ago for me, and I was north of the border.
Okay.
What would you be voting?
I'd vote to stay in, I think.
Why is that?
It doesn't make any sense to me to leave, really. But I mean, the trouble is, I think they've sort of called it. I don't know. The ideal situation, I think, for Scottish people would be, because I think there's actually a pretty decent chance that Britain will leave the EU. I think the best thing for Scotland would be to remain in the EU while the rest of the UK leaves. Basically, I think that's the ideal situation for them, and it's just not possible. You know,
yeah,
it just can't happen because of that's the way the system works, which is
the only
really.
The only chance of Scotland being able to stay, of Scotland definitely being. No, wait, hold on. Let me gather my thoughts. Right, the only chance of the UK staying in the EU at a referendum if Scotland's votes are included.
That is true. That's one way to look at. I mean, the other way to look at it is you may as well leave now, so you can start applying to re-enter the EU straight away. So
it's like getting your UCAS application form in early, isn't it?
Yeah. It is exactly like that.
But I think it's a little bit scary because it will change politics in the new United Kingdom, which will be Northern Ireland, Wales, and England.
I mean, I think
politics exponentially, because without Scotland, the Tories would have won overall majorities in every single. I think it's every single election, including the '97 landslide.
I've heard the opposite. That actually it only would have affected one election. I can't remember.
Really?
That is.
Oh, we need to get our facts straight.
We need to look up facts. I think it's the opposite, but I mean, I think if Scotland leaves, it is the end of the United Kingdom, as in Wales and Northern Ireland will follow suit.
What are they going to do?
You know.
But don't you think that you're see? I can't. God, it's blowing my mind. I'm really worried about it because so the reason that if I were hypothetically Scottish, the reason why I would vote for independence is because I love the idea of nation building. I like that romantic ideal, and also it would be much easier for me to get into the civil service. So it would be purely selfish. But don't you think? Let's change tact a bit. Don't you think that the stance of the pros and the cons, it seems to focus an awful lot, the debate at the moment seems to focus a lot on whether you're going to be financially more secure and if you're going to be better off in an independent Scotland or a Scotland that's part of the UK. And I'm surprised that we haven't yet had the impassioned argument of, but what about the idea of a union, of the union of this 300-year-old institution that's worked incredibly well and that made Britain like the world power that it once used to be and has carried it through the Cold War years.
I don't think anyone cares anymore, though. Do they? Does anyone care about being British?
But where are the calls for? See, I'm a massive nationalist like this. Where are the calls for like the brotherliness between the two countries and the fact that we've come so far together and that we've helped each other and like the Scots, they're not having the argument about Scottish pride. That's going to get me racist hate.
Are they not? I mean, I'm sure there's a slight element of that.
But that doesn't seem to be what's swaying the voters. What seems to be swaying the voters is whether or not you're going to be 200 quid better off in independence.
Well, I think the only way to view because this is really about states, it's not really about cultures. Like, whatever happens, the Scottish culture will still exist. So it's not as if your identity is being attacked in either case, really.
Yeah, but English people are much more likely to identify as British, and I identify as British before English. I might be weird in that, but then what happens when Britain gets chopped up? What happens to my identity? I'm a selfish bastard about this. But
yeah, Scotland, think about what you're doing. Jazza might have an existential crisis.
Yeah, I think the main thing, I think it's a shame that instead of England being like, England and the rest of the UK being like, oh yes, you won't be able to survive on your own. Oh yes, we won't give you the pound. Oh, you'll have to reapply for EU membership. I think we just need to get on our knees and plead, like a lover who wants to leave us. It's like our wife is been flirting with this other like European maestro, like the EU.
That's a bit embarrassing though, and it's very un-English
as well. I don't care if it's together. I'm worried. I'm worried.
I'm not too well. I think they probably will vote to remain in the UK, sort of out of default because I don't think he's made his case amazingly well. So I think that's probably what will happen, but I'm not particularly threatened by the idea of the British state collapsing either, because I don't have that much of an attachment to it.
Confidence in our institution. Oh yeah, and you want to have a republic anyway, so you don't.
Yeah, that's true. But they're keeping the Queen. They could have got rid of the Queen, and that would have been helpful to me. But
she's lovely. Everyone likes her.
No one likes that. Just you. You're the only one who likes that.
Let's not turn this into that argument again because you rinsed me last time. Right, you guys, tell us what you think. Do you think that Alex Salmond has given a realistic proposition for an independent Scotland, or do you think that it's Jimmy's shaking his head, or do you think that we're going to stay the United Kingdom and that I have nothing to worry about and my existential crisis will be kicked at least 20 years down the road? Let us know in the comments below because we like comments. They're nice.
Yep. Let's do that.
Say bye, Jimmy.
Bye, Jimmy.
Bye, Jimmy.
We used to drink bottle gins and the whole world had to sing. Eat the trees and on such bar. We used to dance, so take a chance. I lost my mind to young romance. Yeah, I don't mind, I got it back. Half the time I'm waiting for a second chance.